There you go, baby. Hi everyone, I'm Mr. Puckett. Thank you so much for being here. I know that most people that watch these videos already know who I am, but if you're catching this and wondering why I'm live or wondering who the heck I am, I'm somebody who went through 17 years of addiction and another 4 years on the street trying to get my life together. I then got some notoriety, I guess, on a meme and gift sharing website where I started telling my story all of the time. And this video is because I'm going to enter my, gonna have my 3-year recovery anniversary in just a couple of days. So I was excited to sit down and talk to everyone about the journey I took from being that addict who didn't want to live anymore to where I am now and finally finding happiness. So thank you so much for being here. I hope you engage in the chat. Maybe you could tell me if you can hear me and see everything all right in the chat. I'll try to keep an eye on that throughout the whole show here. These are my dogs, Mrs. Puckett here, and PJ. He is the rambunctious one, but we're excited to be here. I actually had a video all set up today that, hey Annie, thank you. I had a video all set up today that was exactly this, talking about my journey from addiction to where I am today, and unfortunately had some exporting issues, which is not new for me, unfortunately, so I had to scrap the video last minute, and I still wanted to talk and interact with everybody, so I decided to do this live kind of last minute. So I appreciate everybody who saw my tweet or my Reddit post in the last couple of hours and decided to stop by and hang out with me. This is fantastic. Awesome, thank you. That's awesome. So I guess I started my journey in this video talking about even when I was a child, 5 and 6 years old, I can remember having addictive tendencies. I was diagnosed with a severe case of Tourette syndrome at that age, which causes a lot of repetition, and that kind of became a common theme in my life. And I don't really have many visual memories before I'm 18 years old, and I don't know why, if that's because of drugs and alcohol or why, but maybe just a bad memory. But I can remember thinking at a young age, taking this medication for Tourette's and OCD and ADHD, and thinking that if one made me feel good, or at least a little bit better, then 15 or 20 must make me feel a whole lot better, and always trying to get more no matter what I did. If it was taking one and saying I didn't and trying to get another, it was just always more for me when I was a child, and that went for food and it went for everything. It was just like nothing was ever enough. So it probably shouldn't have been much of a surprise to me when I got into high school and started drinking and smoking weed and things like that. I guess some people would call those more tame drugs, that it was kind of never enough for me, that I would always go the extra mile compared to everybody else, whether that would be drinking alone in my basement or smoking all day, every day, and just never reaching the level that I wanted to. It really wasn't until I was 17 that I started to get into some heavier stuff. I hitchhiked across country twice, right when I got out of high school, and was introduced to all kinds of things by people that picked me up, mainly a classification of drugs called benzodiazepine. And that's kind of the first time I can remember in my life doing intoxicants that I didn't want to. I did them for so long that after a while I just couldn't stop anymore at age 17, and I didn't like the way they made me feel, but I kept doing them over and over and over again at that age. And I finally stopped traveling and settled, still 17 years old, settled in a town in the middle of Kentucky, London, Kentucky, in the middle of nowhere, and I still don't know why I did that. But the first week I was there, I was introduced to amphetamines, to meth for the first time in my life. And it was the first time being around kind of harder drugs that we didn't really have in my tiny hometown. And I was just, I don't know if I would say I was instantly hooked as much as I was just instantly in love with meth. And you don't really hear people talk about that so much because you see the after effects of methamphetamines, right? You see these jail snapshots and these people who just look terrible after all this meth abuse. But for me, I quite literally loved it. I really did. But it got to a point where I couldn't stop using it, even when I didn't want to use it, and went almost a full year there in Kentucky without really a single hour of sobriety from my 17 to 18 years old. And that just kind of shot me out of a rocket from my somewhat innocent teenage days into the hell that I would go through the next couple of years. Hey, Mary, thank you for being here. Awesome. Um, and also a very common theme in my life started there in Kentucky. Things just got out of control. You know, I ran out of money because all I was doing was spending my money on meth. I ran out of friends because all I was doing was staying at home. So I really left pretty much everything I owned behind. I was driving at that time. I had a vehicle, and I ended up moving, just leaving town, and eventually ended in San Diego. And I think my thought process at that age was, well, I can just leave meth and just never come back to this town, and I'll never see it, and I'll move to San Diego and I'll be fine. I'll just be a normal member of society, whatever that is. But unfortunately, it didn't work like that. In the first 24 hours of being in San Diego, I was introduced to crack cocaine, and the whole thing just started over again. You know, sitting in a basement for weeks at a time, and just too much was never enough. I could never reach the level I wanted to. It was like, if you can picture a dog on the loose and trying to chase him all over a park, but never catching him, and just chasing him all day, every day for your entire life is kind of what addiction felt like for me, because I could never catch what I wanted to. And then it just continued like that for a long time. I left everything behind in San Diego and took off and moved to Seattle, and was like, well, I'll never see crack again, so we'll go to Seattle. And I moved so often. A lot of you have talked about this in Reddit when I mentioned one time that I moved pretty much every 9 months for a 15-year period. And as fun as that was, and I have a lot of cool experiences, and if I'm out in public and maybe not talking about addiction, I'll talk about them as positive experiences and say, you know, like, look at me, I'm cool, I got to do all of this stuff. But the real story is that I was just jumping from drug to drug, leaving a part of myself in every city and in every highway in between, trying to run away. But I can look back at it now and see that I wasn't really running away from drugs, because you can find drugs everywhere, right? I was just really running away from myself and trying to run away from my own issues, which I didn't know for another maybe 5-10 years that issue was addiction. But in Seattle, I did stay away from drugs for a while, which was, Justin here says he's been sober for 12 years. Man, that's awesome. And Carlsbad, okay, I was in Ocean Beach, so not too far from Carlsbad. That's awesome. Bladed Spokes, what's up? Thank you, Rachel. That's awesome. I don't recognize a lot of these usernames. Everybody has a different one, from Discord to Reddit and Imager to YouTube. So if I'm not saying your name, or if I don't recognize it, it's nothing personal. Mary asks, where did I adopt Mr. Puckett? Actually, that's pretty much right in the story where I am. When I left San Diego, I moved to Seattle. And it was to be with a woman. It was, and a woman I loved at the time. But I mean, I was running away from crack and really still from meth too. So there was a lot going in there. And I don't know if I would have made that move if I wasn't in the circumstance that I was in San Diego. But we spent a couple of years together, and we eventually adopted Mr. Puckett together. We started out in downtown Seattle and moved out to the suburbs, and then we got super bored out in the suburbs, man. So we decided to get a dog and looked all over and eventually found Mr. Puckett, who, anybody watching this channel that doesn't know who Mr. Puckett is, that's the picture. I've always got one hanging up in these videos. He passed away a year ago, but I was with him for 13 years, I guess. And we found him in a German Shepherd rescue league. He had been passed around to a few different rescue leagues. He was very aggressive. So there were rescue leagues that wanted to put him down, and then another one would come in and say, no, we'll take him, we'll fix him or whatever. And he just got passed around a lot and ended up with the German Shepherd. So, but it was in Seattle that I say hello to the doggo. What's up, man? It was in Seattle at that time, right about the time that I got Mr. Puckett, that I found a drug that I could never ever run away from again, and I still can't, and that's alcohol, where you can buy in just about 99% of towns in America if it's not a dry county, and I had been drinking really for the last 5 or 8 years or whatever it was, but Seattle's where it started an every night thing, and from age 21 there in Seattle all the way to age what would have been 32 when I finally got sober. That is 11 years and over 3,000 nights in a row, almost 4,000 nights in a row, that I didn't fall asleep, that I blacked out or passed out. So it seemed kind of calm and cool and innocent in Seattle because we were all going out to bars and and people were having a good time. I don't know that I was having a great time. I always had a fifth in my pocket. So while everybody was sipping beers and I made it look like I was sipping beers, I'd run off to the bathroom and take a few shots there. But it just got so much worse at that point. I eventually left Seattle a couple of years later and traveled the country with Mr. Puckett for a few years, and that's when I started waking up and drinking around 23 years old, where I'd wake up and take a few shots and then take a few throughout the afternoon and then get hammered in the nighttime. And really the next few years are kind of a blur because of it. You know, I was in and out of a few drugs, just whatever city I was in if I had access to it, but it really all became alcohol at that point because it was just the easiest thing I could find. And looking back now, I can realize that it really had nothing to do with alcohol or meth or any specific drug. You know, I was just trying to feel different than the way I felt. And we've talked about this in a couple of videos that I still don't really like the way I feel when I wake up, and whether you'd call that depression or anxiety or just the way humans feel, and it's not enough for me. I don't really know, but I can see now that I was just always trying to change it and always trying to be in a different mood and feel better than I actually felt. Please don't leave. I set the chair up and everything. So when it really got in stage, you know, I traveled around the country like that for a while, drinking a little bit in the morning and afternoon and going crazy at night. And when it really, really got out of control, was in my late 20s, when I started drinking all day, every day. And I was up to about a liter a day, I guess, at that point. But I eventually met a woman and fell in love in Minneapolis, and we moved to Los Angeles together. And this was 2012, I believe it was. So I was 27, and this became the point where I got up to a half gallon of gin every single day for the next 5 years. And it's just such an incredible amount of alcohol. If you can picture 64 ounces or say a 2 liter of 7-Up, but filled all the way to the top with gin. That's what I was drinking every day. 7 shots in the morning was usually the trick. For anybody who knows anything about alcohol withdrawals, you can go through convulsions and seizures. And when I woke up every single morning for those 5 years, I couldn't even hold a toothbrush because I was shaking so bad. So I told myself that those 7 shots were just to get me moving, but they ended up being a whole lot more than that because I didn't stop drinking throughout the rest of the day. She left me. I can't believe it. She's not even here. But this is something I kept from this woman. I kept it. If you can imagine a 400 square foot studio, I mean, some people's walk-in closets are bigger than that in downtown LA, that she didn't know I was drinking like this. She knew that I had a few drinks at night, but she had no idea that my entire life revolved around thinking of when I could take the next shot, or how I could get the next bottle because I wasn't working at that time. So 64 ounces a day, and she had no idea. I was just like many addicts, just a master manipulator. And that poor girl, I didn't know it at the time, and I don't think I was doing it on purpose, and I wasn't doing it to hurt her, but manipulating her, and she paid for rent and food and paid for everything, you know. So I think I manipulated her into enabling me to continue my own addiction. But the day I got caught was a crazy day. The day that she finally figured out what was going on, and we had been together for a year at this point, and in Los Angeles living together for probably about 4 months when she finally figured it out. And I was out and about. I told her I had a job, which I didn't. I lied about that, but I was out walking Mr. Puckett all day because I knew she was going to come home, so I couldn't be there if she thought I had a job. And the toilet stopped working. And there's a point to this, I promise. That toilet came out of nowhere. The toilet stopped working. So her and all of her crafty ideals decided to pop up the top of the toilet, you know, to see what the heck was going on the top shelf there, and found a bottle of gin. And I don't know what she would have thought if it was just that. I probably could have played it off like, oh, maybe the last tenant left it behind. But later that day, she took a shower the exact same day, and was either out of body wash or didn't like hers and wanted to use mine, whatever it was, and used my Squeeze body wash bottle to realize that there was no body wash in it. It was just full of alcohol. and that definitely tipped her off. She started going around, going through some of my stuff in the apartment in the closets, and started realizing that I had hidden alcohol absolutely everywhere. I mean, it was on the fire escape, it was on the roof of the place, it was in every conceivable container. There was liquor all over the apartment, and she really found it all at once. So I came home that night at 6 o'clock, pretending like I had just come home from a job and I'm absolutely hammered, and she was at the front door waiting to confront me to ask, what in the hell is going on and what are you doing? And that was not a good fight at all. That was not a good fight. I tried to hide it still and just continued this path of lies, but I eventually broke down, and it really continued this manipulation. I broke down and started to cry, but I don't think I was really crying at that point. I think it was all just this show, and told her that I had a problem and I needed help, but I didn't believe that. I didn't believe that for a second. I just didn't want her to throw me out of the house. I mean, that's the kind of person I was, manipulating anybody just so I could continue my own addiction. And whether I knew it at the point or subconscious, I don't think it really matters, because I was that kind of low life. And that's where I went to my first rehab in inner city Los Angeles, and it was pretty terrifying. It was the worst rehab. I mean, it felt like a jail. It was so run down, and there were fights, and they had to confiscate drugs and weapons and all this stuff all the time. And but I went through my first real severe case of delirium tremens, which is severe alcohol withdrawal that usually comes after somebody's been drinking every day for years at a time, and it can kill you, and it does kill people, alcohol withdrawals. And that's when I had my first seizure, I think, was on the way to that rehab center, which also had a detox, which I was going into. And thank God I got to the detox center in time. And they laid me up there for, I think, 6 days before I entered the 30-day treatment program. And I didn't want to be there. I hated it. But after like 10 days, after that last drink that she caught me with, I kind of just turned into this guy again. Like, I kind of just turned into Abe at that point. I wasn't hurting. I wasn't trying to hurt other people. I wasn't trying to drink. I just turned back into myself. It happened so quick, and I was leading groups in rehab, and I was the resident advisor, and I was giving speeches in front of like newcomers and telling them how to work. And I thought I'd found it. I thought I'd found my recovery right there, man. My first rehab gave me every tool in the book to be able to become who I am today at a much younger age. But it didn't happen. She picked me up after the 30th day, an inpatient, and we had this cute little scene out in the parking lot where we ran together and did this big hug, and had this big talk, and told her I hated LA, and we eventually moved to Seattle. But it was 24 hours after that rehab that I had gotten another bottle. And I didn't have money. And this is one of my big regrets. This is something I've never told anybody outside of my sponsors before. So the 25 people that are in here now are going to be the first people to ever hear it. And I'm really ashamed of it, which is why I don't talk about it. And that's how I got alcohol throughout all these years, and especially my end stage, because I never had money. So what I do when I knew I was running short on alcohol was take a shower, put on a shirt and a tie and a nice pair of dress pants and a nice pair of shoes. Basically make it look like I'm going to a job interview. And I'd go to Safeway or Albertsons or some grocery store that sold liquor, and walk in and grab a cart and just make sure to wave to everybody like, hey, I hope everybody's having a beautiful day. This is awesome. Maybe even ask some questions like, oh, what do I do with celery roots or something like that? And then walk to the liquor section. I know the Albertsons carts, if I remember correctly, could fit 16 half gallons in if you just line them up like that. And then turn the cart around and walk right out the front door and just wave to people on the way out, and just be the nicest guy in the world, and nobody ever suspected that I didn't pay for them. And if I had to guess, over the maybe 5 years of my end stage addiction, I would have to guess I stole over 300 half gallons by doing it that way. And it's tough for me to deal with now, because I've made a lot of amends in my life. A lot of people that I did wrong, I have apologized to them, and Mary wants me to pet the dog. I've apologized to the people I've done wrong, but when I've done something so huge, I mean, think of the monetary value of that I kept doing repeatedly. I don't really know how to make amends to a grocery store, but that's how I got the liquor, and that's how I got it after that first day in rehab. And I was just always under this impression that I could go out and drink and then be okay, right? Like I could go out and drink a half gallon on Friday and then have a sober Saturday through Thursday and then go on, you know, have another Friday night and get drunk again. But that's just not the way addicts are wired. That's not the way I'm wired. It's something my sponsor used to tell me, is that we can control our first drink, which is what I've been doing now for the last 3 years. I can control my first drink. But as an addict, I can't control my second one. Because as soon as I have that first one, you'll never see me again. I'll never be on this YouTube channel again. You'll never see me on Imager or Twitter. If I have a drink, I'll end up, you know, on a 3-year binge and get arrested in Argentina or something like that. Like the amount of times I thought that I could get away with just having a night of drinking is preposterous, because it's not humanly possible for me to go out and have one drink and to stop. And it's really not. And that's what happened there. And I went back into rehab then in Seattle for my second time. I think I did 10 total. And I'm not going to talk about all of them because that'll get boring, but this is just the beginning. And like each time she was so confident that I was going to get better, and I think I was too. But the second one was the same thing, man. Like I went in, I had a seizure on the way to detox, and I got in just in time. And after 10 days in the rehab center, I turned back into Abe, and I was helping people and giving speeches and having a great time. And then I got out, and 24 hours later, I got another bottle and started drinking again. And I was able to hide it from her this time for a short amount of time in Seattle. Again, lying that I had a job and kind of walking around town all day, pretending that I was at work. But she eventually caught me. She thought I was working at a co-op. Pacific PCC, what's the name of the place that I lied to her about and told her I was working there. And I don't know if she got suspicious or if she actually just wanted to like hear my voice one day, but she called PCC, the co-op, and asked for Abe. And they said, yeah, we don't have an Abe here. He's never worked here before. So she took the rest of the day off work and basically sat in our studio and waited for me to come home to confront me with it. And I came home just completely hammered, and she kicked me out, finally, which she really should have done a long time ago. Now that I look at it, I hated her for it at the time, you know, when I was hammered and I have a backpack and that's it. And me and Mr. Puckett are homeless for the first time in my life. But I don't blame her now, and I wouldn't have blamed her now if she'd done it a year prior, because I was just a negative part of her life. Rusty says, no shame in shoplifting. Oh, wrong one. Rusty says, damn brother, however that won't work as a black guy. That is a silly comment, and it's really there's a lot of truth to it too, that I got away with it for so long because of the way I look. So I'm fully aware of that, yeah. Somebody asked, how often do you get caught with a half gallons in a cart? Once. And not even really caught. Like, I mean, I did this almost 100 times, maybe. Almost 100 times. And the only time that I like kind of sort of got caught, they didn't have any carts, so I had like the little basket. And this was like towards the end of it, and I was in Albertson, so I'm pretty sure that maybe that they like recognized me from the other Albertsons, because I felt like as soon as I walked in that all eyes were on me. And then I filled up this little thing and pretended like I was walking up and down the aisles, and every time I like turned the aisle, there was somebody else there, like an employee waiting for me. And then when I went to walk out of the store, there was like 3 employees so obviously pretending to work, like fixing the brochures, you know, in the entryway, or somebody was like pretending to sweep, but there was nothing on the floor. So I just dropped the handle, dropped it on the floor, and then just walked out. So I didn't actually steal it and didn't actually get caught, but that was the closest. And I haven't thought about this in forever, man, but I feel like I can feel now that feeling that I used to get when I was stealing like that, and how terrifying it was of getting caught and thinking about going to jail and detoxing at that point. That's terrifying. That's absolutely terrifying. Jane says that I don't have to make amends to a literal soulless corporation. I think one of my sponsors would probably disagree with you, but I know what you mean. But yeah, so then we started that started our homeless journey, man. She kicked me out, and there's nothing that can prepare you for that. Like, where do you go? Like, if you think about this for a moment with me, if all of a sudden you got kicked out of your house right now without any money, without any food, or without anybody that you knew in the entire city, what would you do? I mean, it was just so lost, and it was raining out, of course, because it was Seattle, and just not having any idea what to do. And we spent the first month basically just laying in the park, this junkie park called Tashkent Park, where we'd sleep all night because cops didn't really go around there, and spend our days at Cal Anderson, where the cops would kind of clean up at night. So I knew I couldn't be there, and just going back and forth this like couple block radius with Mr. Puckett, and still continuing to steal, but now I was doing it without a shirt and tie, so it became a lot more reckless. Because when you look like you're homeless, you get a lot of eyes on you when you enter a store, because I think a lot of people assume that you're in there without money, which for my case was the correct assumption. I was in there to steal. I wasn't in there to do anything else. So that was terrifying. I eventually got a little bit better at finding shelter. And then something I would do was find condo development. So places in Seattle with cranes, and they're building condos, but they're only doing this from, say, 7 in the morning to 7 at night or whatever the heck it is, and there's nobody there in the evening time. So I would go during the day and sneak into this condo development and find a back door or a side door or something like that, and try to prop it open, whether that was just a rubber band holding in the handle or whatever it was, so that I could go back at nighttime, to go back at 7 p.m. and sneak into this condo development and stay in one of the lower floors, which is like an actual nice, awesome condo, just the top floors are not finished, and the only thing I'd have to do is leave by 6 a.m. so I wouldn't get caught. But that was a pretty terrifying thing too, to think of getting caught there. And talking about it now, I realize how close I was to jail time before I even went to jail so many years later. Wow, how close I was so many different times. It's terrifying. And I think I was more worried about my dog, Mr. Puckett. Like, if I go to jail, what the hell happens to him, and how would I ever get him back? If he ends up getting taken to a shelter by the police, then I get out of jail, and then how do I get him? Like, I can't get there, and even if I can get there, I can't bail him out, right? You got to pay a couple of bucks to the shelter to be able to get him out. So I think I was a lot more worried for him at that point than I was for me. Nunya asked, oh, no, talking to somebody else. I will fight that. Thank you, Audrey. I appreciate that. That's really sweet. So it went on like that for some time. I mean, there's really not much else to talk about when I was homeless in Seattle, because that's just exactly what it was. It was stealing alcohol. It was drinking. At this point, I was up to 64 ounces of gin a day. So that's a lot of alcohol, man. That would kill probably 90% of people in the world if they drank that. But for me, it was just maintaining. Like, I felt like I wasn't getting drunk anymore. I had to drink that much so I wouldn't go into withdrawals. I was so far gone. My father, who lived in St. Paul, Minnesota, eventually found out what had happened, and they had no idea. They had no idea I'd been kicked out. I think I called them from the First Rehab, so they knew that I was experiencing some problems. But I didn't talk to them on like even a weekly or sometimes monthly basis, so they didn't really know what was going on in my life. And when my father found out at 70 years old, man, he got a plane ticket that day that he found out and flew out of St. Paul into SeaTac Airport in Seattle, rented a car, and came and found me in Tashkent Park and picked me up. It was pretty special, man. I as most addicts can probably agree, or at least relate to, I didn't treat my parents very well during those addictive times, because I just used everyone in my life to further my own addiction and to make sure that I could get my next drink or my next needle or whatever the hell it was. So for him to do that was pretty special, and I think really cemented our bond from that point forward. Brought me all the way back, drove me all the way back to Minnesota, and I'm in the back seat of his truck, like, with a half gallon, like still getting smashed at this point because I couldn't stop drinking. I needed a detox center. I couldn't just stop. I was so far gone at this point and had gone through delirium tremens, had gone through alcohol withdrawals so many times that they just get worse and worse. They just beat down your brain more and more every time. And each time I felt like I was closer and closer to death. So I drank that whole way back. I'm sure that was not very fun for him, man. And then did my third stint in rehab in St. Paul, Minnesota. And this was a little different. This was a little different because now now I was finally scared of being homeless. When I was in Seattle, it was the first time I'd ever been robbed, and that was when I was homeless. I mean, who robs a homeless person who has nothing? But I got roughed up a little bit, and so now I was scared of it, and I was motivated to get better at this point, I think, because I wasn't just doing it to please this girl. This girl was done with me, man. She never wanted to talk to me again, so it's not like I was doing it for her anymore. And I think I was still doing it for my dog, but my parents watched after my dog when I was in this rehab, and it was actually a residential living facility. So if you can picture an old folks home is pretty much what it was, but in all of these rooms that are just like a hotel room size, they stack about 8 guys into each one of them in bunk beds. So you're just sardine canned in. But it was a cool spot because after 30 days, you could stay up there in there for 6 months. So it wasn't just this 30-day and then kick you out to the curb type of thing. And after 30 days, you could actually go out into the world and kind of build your life back up. So instead of being locked down after 30 days, I could go out and I found a job. I worked for a paper supply company because I was a huge fan of The Office, and it was like a really awesome job too. And I was just set up perfectly, and I actually stayed there for 6 months. I wasn't sober that whole time though. I just didn't drink. I was still using benzodiazepines from time to time. I was still taking pills from time to time, but looking back, it was a step in the right direction because I wasn't using all day, every day. It's still addiction. I'm still doing something I shouldn't be, but it was definitely a step in the right direction. So I worked at this paper supply company for a couple of months, and at the 6-month mark, I had to leave this transitional housing program, this halfway house, and get out on my own. And 6 months without a drink, I hadn't done that since I was 13 years old. And I felt good about it. I felt real good. And I had set up a house, an apartment, I guess, with a buddy from rehab that we both moved out into in the same day. So now I have a house that I was living in, a duplex. I have 6 months of sobriety. I have money, and I have a job. I was set up for success. And that's really where the story should have ended, man, in 2014, but it didn't. As you can probably guess, that I didn't last 24 hours when I got out of the halfway house before I got another bottle of gin and started the whole damn cycle over again. The guy eventually moved out. I lost my job. I trashed the house, and I eventually lost that and ended up homeless again. But now I'm in Minneapolis. And it's cold, man. Like, it is a very unforgiving place to be like that. So it was it became real, I think, real quick. I'm gonna take a look at the chat. I feel like I've been neglecting the chat here. Your Bible, welcome, man. Thank you for being here. Your Bible asks, would you say your positive effect on people now is sort of worth what you had to go through? That's an interesting way to put it. I think the way I would put it is that who I am today never would have happened if I got sober in Los Angeles or Seattle or Minneapolis. Like where I am in the story right now, at any of these points, if I had gotten sober, I probably wouldn't have been the person I am today that can appreciate so many little things. The video I made for today that I couldn't export started out by talking about how little I have. You know, I don't have a bank account. It said I didn't have a job, and a lot of you know I've been struggling to find employment. I found a job today. It's pretty awesome. It's not what this video is about, so I'm not going to go into it, but I have a job. How cool is that, man? And I had this tiny place and like a couple of pairs of clothes. I don't really have it much at all, and no vehicle or a car, and I barely know anybody. But I've never been happier than I am right now because I can finally appreciate what I have. And I finally have self-love, which took me 3 years of recovery to get to actually love myself and to realize that it's not a crime to love yourself. I think when I started to get better in sobriety, I was so worried about being conceited. And a lot of you told me that after the last video that I should take some credit for these supply drives and fundraisers I do. But I worry about coming across as big-headed and conceited. But that has nothing to do, I've realized, with self-love, and to be able to say that I love myself, you know, and I wouldn't change anything about me, either emotionally or physically. You know, I mentioned the Tourette syndrome, and I have major depression, and I have some issues, man. I have some issues, but they've all made me who I am today, and I never thought that I could be this comfortable with myself. You know, and I've got anxiety. I twitch sometimes. You'll see me be uncomfortable, but I mean in a general sense. I'm very comfortable and confident in myself, which allows me to do a lot of things like be on Imager and put my entire life on there and everything I do and on Twitter and all these platforms because I'm so comfortable now. So I think you may have a point there that I did have to go through all of that to be comfortable enough to help people and to be comfortable enough in myself just to put things out there. You know, it took me to like 2 years of recovery when I'm posting all the time on Imager, and I was getting 1,000 messages a week of people asking how I did it, to realize that so many people went through the same thing I did, and not even just addiction, but depression, and not enjoying the way I feel when I wake up, and realizing that we have so many more similarities than we do differences. I guess for a long time, I kind of thought I was the exception. I thought I was the addict that nobody could help. You know, I thought I was so worthless and so hopeless that no matter what happened, I could never get better, so why even try? And even that in and of itself is a pretty common theme, that people think they're the exception to the rule when really we're all fighting similar battles in one form or another. So I think that's a great way to put it, that I had to go through what I did to be able to help people now. All right. Somebody asked, gin in the toilet. Is gin the poison of choice? Yeah, but I mean, it was kind of locational. When I was out in Seattle, there was a local gin company that was cheaper than 5 o'clock vodka and like Pop Off and all like the real disgusting stuff that usually only like high schoolers drink at prom. So there wasn't so much a drink of choice as there was just finding the cheapest one. And then also, it was in my head that when I was stealing them, that if I filled a cart up with like Crown Royal or like Don Julio, that I might catch some more eyes on me, as instead of like putting these $10 half gallons in there that people will think, well, he's just going to pay for those because those are worthless, right? Like, who would steal those? So I think it was more of that. I would have drank anything. It didn't matter. It was right from the bottle. But yeah, it was gin for a long time, and then at this point in the story, when I'm in Minnesota and just got out of my first rehab and started drinking again, I actually had quite a bit of money. I had saved up all this money in rehab and still went to work every day for a while, completely hammered, but I was making really good money. And then it switched to vodka because there's a brand in Minnesota called Phillips, which is cheaper than just the cheapest thing around. So that's really more of what it was. What was the cheapest way to get it done? Thank you, Steve. I appreciate that, man. Thank you for all the congrats on the job. That's awesome. I'm excited to talk about it when the time is right and appropriate, because I wasn't expecting to get a job today. It just kind of happened. And I start tomorrow, man. I go into tomorrow for orientation. It's all happening so fast. Thank you, Alicia. I appreciate that. I do. You know, I'd never celebrated a recovery anniversary before. I had like posted about it and like made a post on Imager like, oh, cool, this is my 2-year or whatever, but I'd never actually gone out and done anything. So I hope to do that for my recovery anniversary now, which is a couple of days out. It's on the 15th, so it's a week from Monday. But I've asked my best friends here if we can go and do something, and we're definitely going to. So I'm excited to actually celebrate it because I've never felt better about it. I think even at my 2-year recovery mark, I was still worried every day and still thinking about alcohol every day and still waking up. And the first thing I would do was reach for a bottle and it wasn't there. Whereas now it's not even in my mind. Like, I don't walk fast past the liquor store anymore, right? Like, I don't avoid parties and gatherings where people are drinking because it's just not a thing for me anymore. It's just not a real thing. Like, I kind of look at it like this, like, I'm a vegetarian and I think I will be forever. I was a vegan for like a decade and now a vegetarian. So meat is just not a food for me, right? Like, people ask, do you miss meat or do you see a hamburger and want it? Like, no, it's not food for me. It might as well be styrofoam. And that's kind of how I look at alcohol now, I guess, is that it's just not a liquid. It's not something I would put in my body. It might as well be cardboard, I guess. So at this point, I finally get kicked out of this house that I just trashed. Holy cow! After that rehab. And this just kind of went on for a long time in Minneapolis. I'm just going in and out. Where after that, I was homeless for a while. I was staying in shelters, which was really tough in Minneapolis. Now they've overhauled their entire system. But back then in 2014, 15, 16, when I was there, they didn't have enough shelter beds. So what you do, you'd actually get a homeless ID card. If you can picture that, like an ID, like a driver's license that says you're homeless, and then an ID number on it. So you were actually a number to the state. And the purpose for that was that at 9 in the morning, every morning, you would call in this homeless ID number to like an automated system, and you type it in saying that you need a bed that night. They didn't have shelters where you could like go put your stuff down and stay for a week. It was night by night. And then at 5 o'clock, they would call you back if you had a cell phone, which most people didn't at that time, who were homeless. And they would let you know if you had a shelter bed. Because obviously women and children were first priority, and single dudes were the absolute last priority, and for good reason, but that didn't make it any easier than on me. It sucked because most nights I didn't have even a homeless shelter where I could stay in because they were all completely full. So it was a lot more finding condo developments again, but I was walking from St. Paul, where I was, all the way into Minneapolis, where a lot of the growth was and a lot of the building. I was sleeping in Greyhound stations and certainly in train stops too, and outside in parks. And it went on like that for a long time, where I would go into a rehab and just be awesome and be on top of the world, and felt like I was running the rehab, right? Like being sociable and welcoming the new people and giving speeches, and then getting out and drinking immediately. And oftentimes not even remembering getting the alcohol, right? Like I would get out of rehab and seemingly wake up 7 days later just surrounded by bottles in the middle of a junkie park. So it was tough, man, and went through a lot of rehabs. The post that got me well known on Imager was the very first one. I had been posting for years on that website, but the one that really kind of blew up was one called PCP and Me. OP delivers. And you can Google those words or ask me on Discord or whatever. I'll send you the post. But I went in depth about my experiences with a drug known as PCP. It's not a very common drug. Even most of my people in rehabs had no idea what the hell it did or how to get it or even how to use it. So I had a unique experience with that. I think I had maybe 4 more rehabs after the point in the story where I was up until PCP, but it's just the same thing over and over. Going to them, getting out, using, going to them, getting out and using. But PCP was like another level, man. It was, in this post, I talked about how the last thing I remember was the PCP getting. I was living in a Baptist sober house, and I'm not religious. It was really tough. A Baptist sober house where everybody was using drugs. We were getting drug tested like 3 times a week, but people were using K2, and just all these drugs that wouldn't show up on a drug test. I can't name any more off the top of my head, but 2CI, just a bunch of like chemicals, research chemicals. But I realized that PCP wasn't on this test. So I heard a bunch off the dark web, and it showed up to this Baptist sober house addressed to me, addressed to Abraham Switters, and just full of PCP. So that was the last thing I remembered, and that was in St. Paul. And that, at that point, kind of ended my time in St. Paul, and I don't remember anything that happened. Like, that whole post was just stories that people had told me, because that was in September that I got that order. And the next thing I remember, I woke up in March in a psych ward in northern Michigan, about 450 miles away, with no idea like who I was or how I had got there or what the hell had happened. So that post blew up and got out of control, and I got like a ton of messages because I was 6 months sober at the time I wrote that post. I got all these messages of people asked how I did it, like how I got 6 months of sobriety and all that. And I just realized how great that felt to talk about it finally. And to talk about some of my struggles, because I was shut down for so many years. I went to over 1,000 AA meetings in my late 20s, over 1,000. But very rarely did I ever talk. Or if I did talk, I would talk about what was going on presently. Like, oh man, I'm struggling with a job. I have a record now and it sucks, and stuff like that, instead of getting to like some real deep stuff. And then I just kind of took it to like another level on Imager, and started posting more and more about my struggles of early recovery. And at the end of these wholesome and nice posts, and it was just this amazing contrast. But I woke up in that psych ward in northern Michigan, and God, I spent a lot of time there. But this was a common theme that I don't think I've really addressed yet, is that I felt great in this psych ward, just like I did in all these rehabs, but it's this throwaway culture of addicts, a throwaway culture of addicts, to where they'll help you and they'll give you every resource in the world for 30 days, but then they'll just kick you out. So if you're homeless when you go into these places, you're going to be homeless when you get out of these places. And it's not easy to deal with these issues when you're living on the street and you don't have food or transportation or a safe roof over your head. And that was a really tough thing. So that's the third state now that I was homeless in, up on northern Michigan, on Lake Superior, and eventually ended up in rehab there after doing some time in their shelter system. Scarlet Shadow says, I hope you found the book helpful too. I know who you are. That's funny. You must be Tiffany, right? Tiffany sent me a book that said that the title was Positive Self-Talk or something like that. I've only gotten a couple of pages in. Forgive me, Tiffany. It's been a crazy week, but thank you so much for sending that to me. I'm excited to dig in. Hey, Kristen, thank you for coming. That's awesome. All these nice words in the chat. This is awesome. So now I'm in this recovery center now in northern Michigan, and this had to have been my 9th rehab at this point. I skipped over a ton of them because, again, it's just the same thing over and over. 30 homeless, rehab, 30 days, homeless, drink again, and just doing it over and over and over for 4.5 years there. And but now I'm in this rehab center in northern Michigan, and I've never been set up better in my entire life. This place was amazing. Like, we're not talking about an inner city rehab with blood on the walls and like fights everywhere and needles everywhere. Like, this was a really, really nice place. It's right on Lake Superior. They take you out like into the community every day, and you get to do all this awesome stuff. There's like all these musical instruments there. Like, I think somebody called it a yuppie rehab, which I thought was probably accurate, if not a little derogatory, but it was just a really nice place, and you can only stay for 30 days. But I walked in there, and when I did, I'd blown a 0.42 blood alcohol content, which, if anybody knows anything about that, is pretty near death, and I think a lot of people could die with that. They said that it was the highest blood alcohol content anybody had in that specific rehab in the history. So they started to realize that I'd been going through this for some time and that nothing was working. So they actually allowed me to stay there for months instead of just the 30 days that they offered. And I think I did 5 months there, which was just amazing. I mean, it's the same curriculum over and over again, but it's like the further away you get from your problems, the better grasp you have on them, right? So, but my issue was getting out of these rehabs. Excuse me. My issue was when I got out of these rehabs. So I was still looking at that, but I mean, I really left Mr. Puckett out of this story, but he had been passed around to a bunch of people who were taking care of him. I mean, all over the country that were watching him while I was trying to get back on my feet. He was in Michigan with me, but he wasn't at the rehab. He wasn't allowed in any of these places. It was a friend of a friend, Ashley Herman, who was watching him at the time. She was amazing. But that was my excuse for a lot of these places. Like when I was in the halfway homes, I'd leave early, halfway homes that I could live in forever, or sober homes that I could live in forever after rehabs, but they never allowed dogs. So I use that as an excuse a lot. And I don't think at the time I never materialized that sentence. Like I never would have said, I'm using this as an excuse to get out of here, because I don't think I realized that's what I was doing. But to be able to say like, well, I have to be next to my dog now. You know, he's 12 years old, he's gonna die soon. I have to be with him, so I'm gonna leave and go out on my own way before I was ready. And that happened so many times, and it happened in this yuppie rehab that they offered me an apartment. They were about to start a transitional housing program where they were going to designate some of these rehab rooms as apartments, and they wanted me to be the first resident ever. So I could actually live at this place, get a little bit of treatment or whatever, and still be under their jurisdiction as far as, you know, making sure I was sober and in a good place mentally with all this therapy and everything. So, but I used my dog as an excuse, and quite frankly, just a really bad excuse that led to like the worst time in my life at this point. And it's funny to look back. I was making this video and looking back on the first time I was homeless, and I was so sure that that was going to be the worst time of my entire life. And it wasn't even close. I mean, it didn't even compare to the next couple of years, how bad it got. But I met a woman in rehab, which is the worst thing in the world, man. Like, rehab love will never work. If you meet somebody in there, it'll never, ever work. And I was no exception to that rule. Oh, somebody wants to somebody wants to send me a pizza. That'd be awesome. I would love for you to send me a pizza. That's awesome. So I met this girl, and looking back now, I can see that I was just using her, right? Just like I did the girl at the start of the story and everybody in between. That I wasn't in love with this girl. I don't even think I was attracted to this girl, but I met her in rehab, and she was rich, like, for lack of a better word. She had more money than I ever had, and maybe at that point more than my parents ever had. She had all kinds of money. So I fell for her, but I don't know that I really fell for her as much as her situation, because for me it was a way to get out of rehab and to be able to go somewhere and not be homeless, right? Like I could leave this place and be with my dog, and I don't think I was thinking at that point, like, oh, I can go and use drugs and alcohol again, but I'm sure that was in my head somewhere. It just wasn't in the front of it. So this girl got out of rehab before I did, because I had stayed forever, and we stayed in touch. She eventually invited me to come live with her, a couple 100 miles away. And I said yes. So instead of like being in this apartment, which was just going to be, I've never been better set up in my entire life than I was in that rehab, where they offered me an apartment and everything was going to be perfect. But she asked me to come live with her, and I did. So I checked out of that rehab. They begged me not to, because they knew what was going to happen, right? I mean, I'm sure all of you in the story knows what's going to happen too, but yeah, she convinced me that she was sober and doing great on the phone and all this stuff, and I caught a ride a couple 100 miles to her place, and I walked in, and she's passed out on the couch and can't even move, and there's meth everywhere, and there's just drugs all over the house and alcohol everywhere, and she was just a complete mess. And I'm now in this city that I've never been to in my entire life, in the middle of nowhere with no car, and I just got out of rehab. I had my dog, at least. That was cool, man. But you can guess what happened. And that was that I think I made it I think I made it 6 hours that night. I remember walking in and thinking like, all right, I'm gonna fix this girl. I'm gonna stay sober and I'm gonna do all these like grandiose things. But no, I started drinking like 6 hours later, and that's nobody's fault but mine. I'm not trying to blame this on her. This was all me. But this got really wild. Like if you can imagine drinking any more than 64 ounces a day, this was just an onslaught, because now it was like I didn't ever have to leave the house. Right? We could get everything delivered. She had all the money in the world. All the food came to us. Everything came to us. We never had to leave the couch. And it was just like 20 hours a day of drinking and using drugs, and then 4 hours of being passed out. And that's about all I slept at a time for like those 4 years, because after 4 hours of not drinking, I would start to go into withdrawals, and then I would wake up and I would need 7 shots again. So it got out of hand real quick. It really did. I was terrified of being homeless in this small town, but I had no idea that it could be worse than being homeless, because it was at this point that I ended up in jail. This is another thing I've never told anybody before. So these 41 people, man, are going to know something about me that basically nobody else does. Not even my friends here know anything about this. I might have mentioned jail, but not why I went. And it's weird because I did so much wrong. I mean, the stealing the liquor is just the tip of the iceberg, man. I deserve to go to jail for a million different reasons. But the reason I went was a little silly. It kind of was. We had a bunch of people over, and we're all doing drugs. It was like 11 in the morning, dude. We're just completely whacked out of our mind. And there were 2 kids there, like 20 years old or something. I don't know. They were young. I can't even remember their names, but they got like a scuffle in the kitchen. Like somebody threw a punch. I don't know. It wasn't that bad. It was a scuffle, but nobody was like drawing blood or anything. And the girl's house the girl I was seeing picked up my phone off the counter and started to dial 911 to call the police. And she's just like, there's no life in her eyes. She's not even there at all. She's not even there. And yeah, it was wild, and I'm on the couch, and I'm not even there either, and I didn't know she's dialing 911, and I hear her say, "Police, we need help at," and the only instinct in the entire world that I had at that point. There's drugs everywhere. We can't have the police come here, dude. Was just to take my phone out of her hand and hang it up, and that's exactly what I did. Now, I didn't think twice about that. I just hung up the phone. But unfortunately, in this state, which is one of only 3 states, that's a felony if you hang up a 911 call that somebody else made. So in 47 other states, I would have been brought down to the station, handcuffed, paid a fine, and then went back home. But not where I was. Where I was looking at a 2-year felony. So police show up at the house, right? They knock on the door, and all these crackheads go running out the back door. And the police didn't want anything to do with the drugs. They just walked in and took one look at both of us sitting on the couch and said, "Who hung the phone up?" And I had no idea what was going on, right? Like, I didn't think I committed a crime, and I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. And he said, "Who hung the 911 call up?" And I was like, I guess I did. And I got handcuffed and taken to jail. I didn't know I was facing 2 years yet at that point, though. I was still out of my mind, completely out of my mind. Had a seizure it was either the first night or the first day in a holding cell, this 7x7 holding cell that I can touch every side of at any given point. You're just in a box. It was terrifying. And they didn't medicate me the first 3 days that I was going through delirium tremens, and man, it was terrifying. I finally got arraigned, which means like going to see the judge to find out what your charges are. Like 3 days later, because I think it was a Friday, I got booked. And thinking that I was going to go home, right? Like, because I still didn't think I'd done anything wrong, and I probably at that point didn't even know what was going on. I was still so out of it. And go up in front of the judge. It was digital. I'm just in this room, and like he's on the TV screen, and he says what the charge is, and says, "You're facing 2 years. How do you plead?" And I was like, 2 years of what? Like, what are you talking about? But that was the most scared probably I'd ever been in my life, because dare I say, I got used to this homeless regimen. Like I knew what to do when I was homeless, and as long as I had a bottle in my hand, I didn't really have anything to be scared of, because that's what alcohol did for me. It helped me not think. It helped me not feel. It just helped me not exist. And that's what I wanted for so many years. But now I didn't have that. I don't think I was afraid at that point of people in jail, or like what I would eventually see in jail. I wasn't afraid of. I was just afraid of not being able to drink and not see my dog. He was, I think, 12 or 13 at this time. So if I'm sitting 2 years in jail, I was convinced I would never, ever see Mr. Puckett again at that point. It was terrifying. I think I'm losing my voice a little bit. Oh, sorry about that, Juliana. I accidentally just deleted one of your comments. So Guy LVS says, I've only heard about rehab through media, but hearing you say how different they can be, do you know if they are government, private, or charity organizations? Huh. That's a good question. Now, I feel like the first one I went to did have some government regulations, and it was also called the King County Rehab Center. So I feel like maybe that was not charitable organizations, though. They are definitely 100% for profit, because they will milk your, there were multiple ones that I went to that they were still charging my insurance company well after I had left. So they're definitely for profit. But if I had to guess, I would say they're just private organizations. But honestly, I don't know. That's a wonderful question. I really don't know. But I do know they're not charity. That's why you never talk to police. Yeah, well, I mean, if I had any brain cells at that point, or could muster up any type of human thought, I probably would have recognized that. Okay, so I get out of this holding cell after 10 days, and they started to medicate me after a couple of days. It's way too late. I mean, delirium tremens, the worst part of it is the first 72 hours. You can still die, from what I've read, in the first like 5 or 6 days, but it's usually the first 3 days that are the worst. So they pull me out of this little holding cell, and they bring me to Gen Pop, which is general population, which is like the last place in the world that I wanted to go, because I'd never been to jail. I remember I'd been there for 10 days now, so I'm like pretty darn sober. I'm still, like, it takes some time to adjust, and like, especially with meth and benzos and everything I was coming down off of, but I felt like pretty normal. I remember the CO, the correctional officer, walking me down to get my oranges, my jumpsuit, and the only thing I asked him all wide-eyed, well, how did I put it? I said, since this is my first day in jail, does this mean I have to get in a fight with the biggest guy here? And the correctional officer just laughed at me. Said something like, man, you've seen too many TV shows. Because I'm in this small town in the middle of nowhere. I'm not in this huge like prison industrial complex. I'm in this small town in the middle of nowhere that had like 300 people in this jail. Which makes it no less terrifying for a first-time person coming down off all these drugs, though. So I walked into this jail cell. They put me in Gen Pop, which means you're not in a cell with like one other person or 4 other people. You're in the general population, and everybody is there. So what that looked like in mine was that we had one big cell with 16 people, which comfortably you could fit 8, but there's 16 in there, and then 16 in another one, and then they can join by a day room where you spend like 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. So I walk into that day room, and there's 32 people in there of what only should have been 24. Overcrowding was a huge issue my entire stay there. And it's just like, it's practically, I mean, it's not shoulder to shoulder people. You can move around, but it was pretty heavy in there. And I walked in, and I remember just like going around like, hey, hi, I'm Abe. Hi, what are you in for? Oh, I'm from Minnesota, dude. Do you want to play some cards? And dude, that's just like, that's not the way that you act in jail. And it made me a target. The nice guy that just like everybody wanted to take advantage of or pick fights with. And And I didn't really have many violent scenes in my life. You know, I got mugged twice. I didn't fight back though. Like, I don't think I ever had one single person my entire life who came up and wanted to fight me. Well, that's not true. I guess I have had that, but I just run away, right? I'm a runner. Like, I'm out, dude. I'm not going to fight anybody. That's just not who I am. But now I'm stuck in jail and you can't run away. And if you don't fight somebody, now you're an even bigger target because everybody else sees they can just walk all over you. So it was, God, that was terrifying, man. And there's no COs in there. There's no correctional officers. Like, there's just 32 dudes packed into a sardine can, and they make rounds every hour and peek in to make sure that nobody's killing nobody else, and that was it. So to see the fights there the first couple of days was just horrifying, and just trying to stay to myself and like not say a word to anybody after making the mistake of like walking around and Forrest Gump waving to everybody. God, that was scary, man. I haven't talked about that in so long. Kristen asked, what made you decide to start sharing your story? It all happened organically. It really did. Even that PCP story that I mentioned before, the first time I had ever like told strangers about what was going on, that started just because of a comment I made. Some random person somewhere in the world made some post about something on Imager. I don't even know, man. And one of the comments said made a joke about PCP and then put a GIF below that's like these two girls at a rave. Everybody's seen it. I don't know how to it doesn't matter. So I commented below that and said, just made a joke that said, I think I said something like, pro tip, don't use PCP. And I got like a bunch of comments below that said, you need to make a post about this. We want to know what PCP is all about. So I made that post and it just got this crazy response and all these messages of people asking like, well, how did I stop? And how did I have at that point 6 months sober? And it just made me feel good to realize that I wasn't alone. That was probably one of the first times in my entire life that I didn't feel alone, when I started posting these things and opening up a little bit more and a little bit more. And people would contact me from all over the world saying things like, yeah, I'm going through that too, man. Like, I don't know that I've never felt lonely in a physical sense. I could spend all my time alone and be perfectly fine. But I feel alone in my thoughts and my feelings because I feel like I'm the only person going through them. And that all these people in the world who have gotten better and conquered their own stuff doesn't apply to me because I'm going through something different. And that's how I felt for a long time. So to hear people open up back to me and say that they're going through the same thing just gave me this sense of community within. And this is, not specific to Imager. This is on Facebook and on Discord and everywhere I was doing this. And it just felt good. I finally stopped feeling so alone in the world once I started doing that. Even though physically, like, I was pretty alone, I just didn't feel mentally alone anymore. It was a really good feeling, and that's why I started and continued for so long. I mean, that PCP post when I first opened up was 2.5 years ago now. So I've come a long way from then of being so scared to make that post and just talk about like 30 months of my life. And here I am telling you like this story that really makes me, I mean, you guys are here and I love you and I'm glad you're here and you're here because you want to be. But there are definitely a lot of people that would hear this story and say, wow, that guy is a real POS because of all the things that I did. So there's that fear of being judged too, right? That's hard to overcome when you're speaking to a group of people that don't know who you are. That I don't really have anymore, especially here on YouTube, because you guys know, you've seen these videos, you've seen my posts, you know who I am and a little bit of what I went through and hopefully know that I'm not that person anymore. So it's tough to start, but once I did start opening up, it felt a whole lot better, for sure. How many people are going to send me a pizza? This is awesome. I love this. Thanks for coming, James. That's awesome, man. Starting to get a stuffy nose, too. It happens every time I talk too much. I don't know the science behind that. So I'm in jail, right? And after like a month, it became a little bit better because now I'm finally like 100% detoxed. Now like a bunch of these people had rolled through. Like if you don't know the difference between prison and jail, county jail is usually where people go if they have a sentence of under a year, or if they're waiting to get sentenced and go to prison, which is exactly what I was doing. Now, this was a huge issue and a glaring flaw in our judicial system was that I was facing a 2-year felony, right? So I pled not guilty to it. I mean, I did it, man. I did it. I'm telling you right now, I took the phone out of her hand, but did I deserve 2 years for it? I don't know. I mean, I didn't think so, obviously. But I pled not guilty, and they set my trial date. My trial date, the right to a quick and speedy trial, was 13 months in the future, which meant I was going to sit in county jail for 13 months, a year and a month, just to be able to go in front of a judge and I guess a jury and tell my story. And then if I'm found innocent, they let you go, but you still sat 13 months. And the only way to get out of that situation is bail. And that's such a flaw in the system because I wasn't from this state. I was from 400 miles away, and the judge was sure that I was going to flee. They set my bail so high that even my parents couldn't afford it, let alone me who didn't have any money. And we usually see that with racial inequality, where bails are getting set so high that women and men are being jailed, waiting for a court date, and even though they're innocent, they're spending all of this time in jail just because they can't afford bail, while a politician or a hedge fund manager or whatever it is could be facing 50 years, but he'll be out walking free tomorrow before his court date because he can afford thousands of dollars of bail or even $1 million in bail. So it was such a flaw in the system because I could have been found innocent and I still would have sat 13 months in jail. I mean, it's just absolute nonsense. Judicial reform isn't really on my list of things for the future, but I'm getting all worked up talking about it. Somebody asked, do you remember what your bail was? I think it was $25,000. And I don't really know much about bonds or anything like that. It's something like, forgive me if I'm butchering this, but you can go to a bail bondsman, put up some type of collateral, like if you own a house or a car or something, and then all you have to do is put up 10% of that bail. So I would only have to put up $2,500 to be able to get out. And then I show up to the court date, I get my collateral back, and then that's it. But the judge didn't allow me bond. And that was my issue. And even if she did, I don't think my parents could have afforded $2,500 either. But my issue was because I was out of state, the $25,000 had to be paid in full for me to get out. And that's not even a question of an issue. No, it never would have happened. If I could have gotten it down to 10% and paid $2,500, I maybe could have called like a bunch of relatives and gotten it done. But they were so sure that I was going to skip bail and leave town, and which I was, let's be honest. If I would have gotten bailed out, I never would have went back for my court date, right? I would have had a warrant in that state for the rest of my life, and it's just what I would have done. I would have been perfectly fine with it and had no moral qualms about doing that. But yeah, so they didn't allow me to do the 10%, which was unfortunate. Andrea says that more and more states are doing away with the bail system. I didn't know that. I still don't know a lot about the system, but that's good to hear. System is broken in many ways. It is. Amy asked a little while ago, was it hard to adjust to normal life? I'm not sure if you mean once I got out of jail or earlier in the story in rehab. If you mean once I got out of jail, let's talk about that because I didn't do 2 years in jail. After the first first month or so, all these people got filtered out, right? So like they either finished their sentence or they got shipped off to prison. So after a month, I'm one of like basically an old timer in jail, right? Like I'm one of the 10 people who had been there for the longest, and finally had some respect and nobody messed with me anymore, which was cool. Like I got into the routine of jail at that point. Like as soon as there weren't like huge dudes messing with me all the time, right? And like threatening physical harm, like it wasn't so bad. So we played a lot of games, and like I love to gamble. We played a lot of poker, and for anybody who doesn't know this, currency in most jail systems is ramen noodles. It's just something that everybody has on commissary is ramen noodles. So that's how you bet. That's how you buy things off of other guys in jail. It's how people were paying for drugs. Ramen noodles are just their currency in there. They're just as good as money. So I did a lot of gambling and won a lot of ramen noodles, which afforded me a whole lot of luxuries at a certain point, which was buying other people's pillows, buying other people's clothes, afforded me every luxury I could really have in jail just because I was so good at poker and a little lucky, I guess, that I had the most money in there, which was just ramen noodles. So it made it a lot more comfortable for me after then, but I was in jail for 3.5 months. And I'm looking at this court date, which is still 10 months away for me to even plead not guilty, man. And I woke up one morning and they called me down to the courthouse, which was like basically on site. It was next door. One of the COs came and got me and woke me up and said, "You have a court date." And I was like, "Oh, dude, this cannot be good." He said they had added charges on to what I had done. And at that point, I was just ready to throw my life away even before that, right? Because I got 10 more months in jail. I'm figuring my dog's gonna die. And it doesn't matter, like when I get out of jail, I'm just gonna be homeless anyway, and I'm just gonna go grab a bottle. Like jail doesn't solve any of my problems. It just adds more to it. So I get down there and they were talking about adding more charges, but it wasn't a bad thing. They were doing that to offer me a plea deal so that I could plead down from a felony to a misdemeanor. Which if they would have done that in the first week, I never would have actually gone to Gen Pop. I never actually would have sat in jail more than a week, but they waited 3.5 months to do that. And I took the plea deal. And I got out of jail that day, like 30 minutes later. So from the time I woke up to I went to court to I was like actually released from jail was like 45 minutes. It all happened like that. Let's see, we have a question here that says, do you feel that your time living on the streets helped you adapt to the time in jail? That's a good question. It gave me some street cred. I mean, if nothing else, right? Like, because I walked in all wide-eyed and like waving at everybody. But the more I talked and the more people heard what I had been through, it gave me a little bit of credit that I wasn't just some like bougie white guy, right? Like it gave me a little bit of credit. I guess it might have helped my time in jail in the sense that there's nothing to do. When you see these shows like in movies on jail, I mean, they have a weight room, right? They go outside. They have classes. But in this state where I was, if you have a television in the day room, that counts as recreation. So in the 30 days that I was in jail, I didn't leave the jail cell one time. And neither did anybody else. Because a television is considered recreation. So they don't have to give you exercise. They don't have to give you sunshine. They don't have to give you Alcoholics Anonymous classes. They don't have to give you anything. And that's so messed up to think that just because we had a TV that we're stuck in the same cell every single day. And there are people that had been there for a year. That's usually the max for county jail is about a year. So to think of them sitting in the same room for a year, it's just crazy. Absolutely. So I guess my homeless time did give me a little advantage there because I learned how to do nothing. But when I was homeless, I was doing that with a bottle in my hand, and that's a big difference. Ooh, I think I might have missed one. Have you found a difference in the way people treat you once they find out about your jail time? Dude, I don't tell anybody I went to jail. But yes, I mean, this month, like trying to get a job, I got to the final interview of X amount of all these amazing places where at any other point in my life, I would have got the job. But they're all contingent on a background check. And I've lost, I can't tell you how many jobs in the last year where I've gotten to the final interview where they actually did my background check and gave me an offer letter contingent on the background check and then pulled the offer. So people in my life, not really, but employers, definitely. Right. Juliana asked, did you get to take your ramen with you when you left? No, that's something, and this might be this jail specific, but everybody wants to pick a fight with you on your last day there. You're going to get robbed on your last day in this jail. It's just going to happen, and they're going to take everything you have there because they know that you can't fight back. If you fight back on your last day in jail, they're going to add more time to your sentence. So it's just a rite of passage, I guess, that I got robbed on my way out. How was the addiction withdrawals while in jail? The absolute worst. Just because I couldn't do things, like I couldn't walk around, you know, and the hallucinations were definitely the worst. Oh man, because there's no window. Like you're just staring at concrete. And where I was in the holding cell, there's not even a bed. God, the hallucinations in there, holy crap, man. It's terrifying stuff. And you just don't know what's real and what's not. Those were the worst delirium tremens I ever went through. And I went through medical detox 28 different times. So I was familiar of what alcohol withdrawals were, but that was the worst. Guy asks, how did you store your vast ramen riches in Gen Pop? At first it was tough, because like I said, people were all over me when I first got in there. A lot of people took advantage of me. When I kind of became a more senior member, it wasn't so tough. I was able to get a lot of things off of commissary, even though I didn't have money because I had all these ramen, so I could trade. And one of the things I was able to get was a box, which is just a cardboard box that fits underneath your bunk. And really, when you're in the day room, you can see into each cell, so it's pretty hard to steal from somebody, I guess, at that point. So unless somebody was like actually like mugging you and up in your face, there really wasn't people sneaking around and stealing. Hey Verde, thanks man, I appreciate you, bro. That's my Nashville buddy right there. So I get out of jail this day, right? And I've been through 10 rehabs. I didn't even talk about the psych wards. I mean, 5 different psych wards, 12 different times. And only 3 of those were voluntary. Like I'd been forced against my will so many times into psych wards during this whole thing. I get out of jail now in this small town in the absolute middle of nowhere. And I just had nowhere to go. I had no money. I went to jail in boxers and like a tank top. And I get out of jail and it's like freezing cold outside. But I called my sister before I got out and was just like, hey dude, I have a sister that's in the Twin Cities. We've never been terribly close, but she's always been there for me. We just never, I guess, been like best friends or anything like that. But she's a wonderful person. And I called her and was like, hey, I'm getting out of jail. Do you want to come to this place and like figure out what the hell I can do with my life? Because this place it's a small town. It didn't have sober homes. It didn't have rehabs. It didn't have a homeless shelter. It didn't have anything. So I just stayed in this town all alone for a couple of days, and my sister eventually made it there and picked me up and told me that my father had made some arrangements for me. And my parents helped me really every step of the way, but they learned quick. They learned at the start of this whole video, of this story, not to enable me, not to give me shelter, not to give me money, because I was just going to take advantage of it, right? So they were there for me every step of the way, but they knew that they couldn't help me in certain ways. They knew that if they let me stay on their couch, that I was just going to, start drinking and blow the whole place up. Or if they gave me money, I was just going to go spend it on drugs. So they helped, and they were very smart about it. But that my father had set something up for me. My father had, I think, 17 brothers and sisters when he was growing up. And they all have a million kids too, so I haven't met any of these people on my father's side who are down here in Tennessee, coincidentally, in a small town in the middle of nowhere, way the hell out somewhere. I don't even know which way it is. But evidently one of his sisters is a nurse in a rehab facility. And her and her husband, both senior citizens, agreed to put me up for a while. So my sister brought me back to the Twin Cities, and thank God those like couple of days that I was in this small town after jail that I didn't drink or use drugs, because now at this point I had been in jail for over 3 months. So I had all this recovery, and it's probably the most recovery I had had up until that point was 3 months. I spent 6 months in one of those rehabs, but I was using benzodiazepines, and every other time was about a month of rehab before getting back on the street and using again. So I had 3 months. And I didn't want to go back to jail, so I wasn't going to go steal again. But we went back to pick up my dog. Mr. Puckett was being watched after at this point. Where I don't even know what city he was in. He got passed around by so many people, so many strangers I'd never met before that were helping this dog. That's a video all of itself. But we went to pick him up, and it might have been the longest I had gone without seeing him, I think, about 4 months at that point. So we picked him up. And my father brought me all the way down to Tennessee, and I had no idea what was going on or what this was going to look like. And we pulled up in this gorgeous, like, cottage-type house in the middle of nowhere. And these two senior citizens come walking out with these huge smiles on their face and gave me this big hug, and they said, "You're Abe." And they had no idea what I'd been through. They had no idea. They didn't even know I was in jail, let alone anything that we've mentioned in this video. They just knew I was struggling with alcohol, as they put it, struggling with alcohol, to say the least. But they took me in with open arms, dude. They gave me a bedroom where I stayed, and they didn't request money or work or anything. And this was such a huge turning point in my life, because this is the first time that I have a safe home, that I have food and shelter provided, and I have a bit of recovery before going down. It was like all of these pegs fell into their correct hole for the first time in my life. And it was an interesting experience, because it was so wholesome, man. That's where it all started. It was wholesome family country love, right? Like, they had a couple of family members that lived close by, and they spent every second together, and they had these big meals and like cooked breakfast and like talked to each other at the breakfast table, and like it was like the most Leave It to Beaver thing that I had ever seen in my life. And it was so cute, and frankly it was a little boring too, and I don't mean that in a bad way. There was no stress. I've been living in these huge cities and trying to move 1,000,000 miles an hour for my whole life, and all of a sudden this was just like the slowest pace I'd ever been around, and it was exactly what I needed. Not to mention it was a dry county. For any of you non-Americans watching, there are some places in America where you cannot buy liquor, or it's illegal to possess liquor or beer. And not only was this a dry county, but every county around it was dry. So if I wanted to get, say, a bottle of gin or a bottle of Heineken, I would have had to have walked, I think, 81 miles to legally do so, which certainly at some points of my addiction I would have done. But I felt so comfortable where I was with these people, and felt so safe for the first time in my life since I was 16 years old. I felt safe in this home. Ruby says, have you considered counseling or doing speaking gigs for addicts and inmates? Yeah, actually, and more, like a whole bunch more recently, because a bunch of people said that on Reddit the other day. And then my best friend in the whole world, he does the music for these videos, Josh Staffield, said that in an instant message the other day. I should do some public speaking like that. And it'd be awesome for anybody who's at my last live stream. I mentioned that was one of my first jobs. I gave political speeches all over the country after getting kicked out of school for giving a very political speech. So I think that would be a really special thing to do. I wouldn't know where the heck to start something like that. Like, it's not like you just call a high school and say, hey, I'm an addict, can I talk to your kids? But it'd be a cool gig, because that's something That's something I took from AA, and I'm not an AA guy at all, but we talk about the 12th step is that giving it away. We can only keep what we have by giving it away. You have to help other people with what you've learned. That's how you complete the steps. You have to constantly give back. Yeah, public speaking would be pretty cool. That's correct. Yeah, it says sounds like that 911 call led to a wonderful healing experience. It led to a terrifying situation that eventually did. So I'm down in Tennessee with these people, and I mean, there were some close calls. I eventually had some money and like went on the dark web and was like looking at PCP again. Like I'm not gonna say that like all of a sudden I was just better because I wasn't. You know, I was still not sleeping. I was still so terrified and like having these nightmares and like waking up of all the things that had happened in jail and on the street. And I don't want to minimize like PTSD and call it that, but it was like I was reliving all of these experiences every day there. Yeah, and it was really intense, but it was a safe place for me. It was such a safe place. It was incredible, and I stayed with them for a couple of months. And then around the 6th month mark of my recovery, so like 3 or 4 months in jail and 2 or 3 down there, we all kind of decided that it was time for me to start working again, which they didn't expect at first, but I could only sit around for so long, right? I had to eventually start my life again. And I tried for a little bit down in this town that had like 200 people, and there's like one restaurant and one stoplight, and I couldn't really find a job down there. So after a whole lot of discussion, we decided it might be best for me to go back to St. Paul, to Minneapolis, where I know the place like the back of my hand and face some of my demons of what happened there on the street. And thank God my parents came through again. I was 31 or 32 years old, and I moved in with my parents in St. Paul, Minnesota at 6 months sober, and lived in it, had this like, I don't know, what's smaller than a twin bed? It was like a race car bed. And stayed in that and got a job actually the first day I was in town. You know, I was applying when I was in Tennessee, and I had an interview the first day when I was there, and I had a job at a Safeway gas station. But it's worse than that. It was a Safeway in like inner city, and I was working the overnight shift from 10 p.m. to like 8 a.m. And I mean, there's like robberies and drugs and prostitutes, and like this place was not cool, man. Like this was no place for me. And they were paying me $10 an hour, but so it was really weird to go from this like the incredibly wholesome place down in Tennessee with more love than any place in the world to something like that. That was really tough, but it was my springboard to the future because I started making money there. My parents would buy my food. I mean, they did everything for me at that point, and I lived with them for 3 or 4 months until I had enough money to move. And that's when I moved down to, came down to Tennessee, but not here. I had originally moved down to a small town called Columbia, another kind of middle of nowhere town, about an hour south of here, with like 30,000 people or something, and got a different job with that company and came down here for that. And that was the first time that I was on my own with Mr. Puckett and sober in my entire life. And it was the first time I was ever on my own and sober in my entire life. I had an apartment when I was 16 years old with my girlfriend, and I wasn't sober then. So I guess I was 32, 33 years old, and that was the first time in my entire life that I actually had my own place. This little tiny apartment in the middle of nowhere. But I remember that first night. Because all I ever thought about, like, when I was on the street and I thought about getting back on my feet, I didn't think about, like, spending money or, like, going to sports games or... All I thought about was just sitting on a couch with my dog, watching TV. That was all I ever wanted. And when I was in Columbia, I finally had it. And I remember that first night looking around, and it was this crappy little place in the middle of nowhere, and and we didn't do anything for like the first 3 days. We just sat on the couch together. I think I think that's a, I think that's why I can appreciate what I have now so much. Man, it was everything. Those first couple of days, just sitting inside in my own place, watching this like little box TV that had like 4 channels on it that were all fuzzy. It had roaches like everywhere and like stink bugs all over the place, but like it was mine. I think even down there I was pretty scared though. Like I would go out of my way not to walk past bars and liquor stores. You know, I hit my 1 year of recovery when I was down there. I was still pretty scared that I would end up using again. But I just kept open about it. I kept talking more and more, and this was like I'd already gotten huge on Imager at this point and was posting like multiple times a week and sometimes 1 million views a week, and I'd been doing supply drives and fundraisers and helping as many people as I could up until that point, and eventually started the Free Pizza Dude in this small town, and it was just everything. It really was. No way, my mom is in the chat. Are you serious? Everybody type, "Hi, Mr. Puckett's mom." My mom is in here. Are you serious? That's so awesome. Oh, man. Oh, Mom, I miss you, man. You're all the way, you're like, what, 1,500 miles away. I miss you. Oh. So, and life was really pretty worry-free at that point. I'm in a small town in the middle of Tennessee with Mr. Puckett, and I'm living simply. And that's really what I learned from living with my father's family, who took me in after jail. It's just how simply they lived. You know, they didn't need to go out and party or go to concerts and like do all this exciting stuff. Like they were so content to just be around family, right? And just to be safe and like to be home. They were so content to do that. And that's just something I never knew before. And it was all brand new to me. It was all brand new to me. I eventually stopped working for that gas station, and that's when I started working for Imager. They only paid $10 an hour, so it wasn't like keeping me afloat, but it was fun for a while. And then the next big thing was when Mr. Puckett got sick, and that was the closest that I was to actually using again ever since I started this recovery session. I guess 3 years ago was when. was when Mr. Puckett got sick. It happened. I feel like it happened so fast. I go back and read the post that I made on Facebook, and I mean, it was over like a 2-week period, but it felt like it happened so fast. And the day he died, I mean, even the night before, like I was still under the impression that he was going to make a full turnaround and he was going to be perfectly fine. That was my impression. And the morning he died, I've talked about this on this channel. I walked around aimlessly for hours, like going back and forth, wondering if I should just take my life. And then I thought about that for so long. This isn't what this video is about, but I mean, I had tried to commit suicide a few times, and I thought about it for so long that Mr. Puckett was all I had, that is what I was going to do when he died. But then I built up like all this recovery and this platform and had all this love. That I wasn't going to do it anymore. But then he did die, and now I'm in the middle of nowhere, like with nobody that I knew and with nothing. And all of a sudden I didn't appreciate the things I had anymore. You know, I looked at my life as worthless again without him, and I didn't appreciate the couch anymore. But that's when I found Mrs. Puckett. And then she was my rock, and eventually PJ. And I haven't had any times like that since. I really haven't. I haven't had a single moment since Mr. Puckett died where I'd even thought about having a drink or wondered what would happen if I did. man, it took me so long to be comfortable in my life, and it took me even longer to be comfortable in my recovery. But I'm finally there to where I can talk about it and talk about all the ridiculous stuff that I did, and not want to break down. You know, I mean, the only time I thought I was going to break down in this video was from joy. So, I mean, my recovery journey is just littered with failure. And that's something important to remember, that if you're going through something like this, whether it's depression, you know, addiction, eating disorders, whatever it is that progress is never linear. Progress doesn't have a start and an end, and it certainly doesn't have a one-way street in between. My progress went forward and back and forward and back and forward and back. But that doesn't mean that those early rehabs were completely worthless. Every single one that I went to eventually contributed to my end success, to my overall happiness today. Every single one of them did. So it's important to remember that when you're on this progression, that you're going to have slip-ups and you're going to fall back, but it doesn't negate the progress you've already made. Progress is never linear. So there isn't some like magic pill that I have or some amazing 30-second story on how I got sober and turned my life around. It was the series of blunders and mistakes, and then trying again, and then messing it all up, and trying again, and messing it all up, and all the help from my family, hi mom, and all the community resources I used, even if I went out and got hammered again after it, or eventually ended in jail after it, all of those things contributed to my overall success. So the only short way I can say how I got sober and turned my life around is that I just never gave up. All right, I missed a whole bunch of the chat. Let's see what we got here. Everybody said hi to my mom. That's so cool. She's up still in Minnesota, so they're pretty far away, and me not driving is pretty tough to be able to get up there. So I hope to see you soon, Mom. PJ looks so cute curled up in the chair. Yeah, he does. Somebody says my outfit really suits me. Well, thank you. That's awesome. This is what I wore to my interview today. I had 2 interviews today. I had one via Skype that I had to actually dress up a little bit more for, and then I had another one that was like pretty informal. And I actually asked them, I said, if I show up in a shirt and a tie, are you going to make fun of me, or should I like dress down a little bit? And they told me to dress down. So this is what I wore, and that's the job that hired me. So evidently it worked. Donna asked, do you consider it as an addiction, disease, or both? Well, addiction is a disease, so both. And I mean, that's not an opinion, that's said so by the American Medical Association and by the Centers for Disease and Control, the CDC. So addiction is a disease, but I mean, when I was in it, when I was going through it, I don't think I saw it as a disease. I saw it as me continuing to mess up over and over again. But now looking back at it and seeing the big picture, I can so obviously see it as a disease because it still incorporates into aspects of my everyday life. I mean, I still do things either 0 or 100, and that's my running that I take way too far sometimes. That's my eating that I take way too far sometimes, and I've dealt with different forms of eating disorders. And that's gambling that I had done way too much at certain points. And so my addiction wasn't just alcohol and drugs. Like, just because I stopped using, I'm still an addict today, even though I'm sober. And those addictions pop up and manifest in many different ways in my life. But that's not something that I think I understood when I was going through it. Hello, John. All right, so the first time that I did one of these, we realized that my phone dies after 2 hours. And we are now at 1 hour and 45 minutes, which actually works pretty well because I think I've told the story up until about today. So I'm wondering if we should wrap it up here. If anybody has any more questions, throw them at me now, because in the next 5 to 10 minutes, we should probably wrap it up so we don't get an abrupt ending like we did on that first one. Man, I was so nervous for that first live stream, and even for the second one. And this one, like, I didn't have any nerves at all. So this is getting a whole lot easier. And that's definitely thanks to you guys, and maybe a little bit thanks to having a topic today instead of just flying off the cuff and trying to fill time. I actually had something I wanted to talk about. So thank you all for still being here. 45 people, that's crazy. And a lot of you have been here the whole time, almost 2 hours. This is unbelievable. Chelsea's asked, what is my new job? So I guess I can answer that since we're done talking. It's a little confusing because the first job that I went for, I still want. And they're going to pay me way more money to work from home next to my dogs. But they're not going to make a decision on it until next week. So there was a job today that actually offered me a position where I kind of thought I didn't think I was going to take it because I thought they were going to pay me next to nothing, because these places normally do. But they paid, their offer to me was like 75% more money than what Imager was paying me. And this is, if you don't know, I'm really into my food. I'm a vegetarian. I eat mainly raw foods and love to juice and create all these crazy things with just raw foods. So I took a position as a produce supervisor at a local organic food co-op that is only 3 blocks down the road from me. So I'm really excited. I understand it's not the most professional job, and it might look weird on my resume next to some of the more advanced things I've done in my past, but it's so much fun. I can't tell you how much fun it's going to be. It's so fun. I've done this all over the country, but I had done it at a pay rate that was like 50% of what they offered me. So I went through this interview today thinking like, all right, this is cool. Maybe I'll see if they can like work me in on the weekends, because I'm not going to do 40 hours of this job at a rate that won't even pay my rent. And then at the end of it, they asked if I would work the job for this amount of money, and I basically said no. And then they just like took it up to volume 11 at this point, and threw this number at me. And I was like, oh, yes, I will do that. So tomorrow I go in for my orientation. I know how the job works. I've managed produce sections in local organic food co-ops in multiple cities all over the country. So it's going to be a very easy transition for me. And I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a great way for me to meet people. It's a lot of people my age who have somewhat similar mindsets on food and socialization that work in food co-ops. So I'm really excited to be able to meet some people as well. And it sucks that I won't be home. I would much rather be working from home, but 3 blocks away is pretty radical. I can still walk home on my lunch and hang out with my dogs, but it'll be a big transition for them, because ever since I've had them, I've never been away for more than, I think, 2 hours one night. We went and got pizza. But besides that, I've barely been away from them. So that'll be a tough transition, but I can't tell you how much I've been struggling financially. So this is a huge, huge day for me. Thank you guys. So awesome. I don't know why I'm explaining it. Like, I don't know. I feel like people... Sometimes I feel like I had to explain it, like somebody would think down on it, like, oh, he's just working in a grocery store, that sucks. But I'm so excited for it. It's just an awesome opportunity. And to be able, they do a lot of classes and things like that. So to be able to get back, I used to teach a whole bunch of raw foods classes, how to dehydrate, juice, and process raw vegetables. And that's something I can get back into there. And I'm really excited to do that, because that kind of combines my enjoyment of public speaking and my love of raw organic vegetables into one. So that'll be cool to be able to do. And maybe a video on it someday. I know everybody on YouTube does cooking videos, but maybe someday. If I get offered the work from home position, will I accept? I have no idea what to do with that. And honestly, I don't know what it pays. I would imagine it's even more, which is not the whole kit and caboodle money, but it's certainly a big factor. So I have no idea. I have no idea if I'll do that. We'll have to find out, I guess. not a question, but a suggestion. Spend some time relaxing and doing some fun after this. You talked about a lot of heavy topics. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that, Havelock. I go into work tomorrow at 9 a.m., so it's all happening so fast. So after this, I get to sit down on my couch, just like I like to, and watch a basketball game that I've been excited for all day. We got the Suns on in just another hour here, so I'll be excited to relax and take a load off, because this was some heavy stuff tonight. All right, I'm going to sign off. I don't want another abrupt ending. I can't thank you guys all enough. You make this so easy on me. Not only do you ask the questions to help me fill some time, but to see that so many people stayed for the whole thing was just incredible. And I think we only had 5 people in here when I started. So this is really awesome. I was so angry. I was so pissed off at this video that I spent so much time making that I was having problems exporting, just like I had a couple of months ago. But this made me feel a lot better that not only could I get some of these words out, but that I could actually do a video and interact with you at the same time. And it's like all of that stress just never happened. So thank you so much, Mom. If you're still watching, I love you. Give me a call sometime. And I don't know, I guess we'll see you next Thursday. I'll have to get some new equipment and some new software and figure out what kind of video to make. Thank you guys so darn much. Come here, Bubs. Yeah. Remember, I think the last video we did this, so maybe this is a new tradition for PJ to wave us out. Have a beautiful night, everyone.